I wasn't even supposed to see it. I was in the bridal suite at the Westbrook Hotel in Charlotte, fighting with the clasp on my grandmother's bracelet. The room had this big window that looked straight out onto the cocktail area where guests were starting to mill around. I wasn't paying attention to any of it until I was. Sandra was standing at the bar. She had on that ivory blazer she always wore to things she considered important. She looked left, then right, the way people do when they think no one's watching. Then she opened her clutch, pulled out a small glass vial, like the kind you'd see in a chemistry lab, and tipped a few drops into the champagne flute sitting on the bar. That was my glass. I'd set it there maybe 15 minutes earlier, when I came down to check on the florist situation. I didn't move. I just stood at the window and watched. She dropped the vial back in her purse, smoothed her blazer, and walked over to chat with someone I recognized as a partner at Derek's firm. I went downstairs, walked over to where she'd been standing, picked up her glass from the seat she'd just left, and set it where mine had been. Then I went back upstairs, sat down on the little velvet bench by the mirror, and texted my sister, "I need you near me tonight. Don't ask questions yet." That was 4:45 in the afternoon. My name is Brooke. I restore antique furniture for a living, the kind of stuff that comes out of old southern estates, pre-war pieces that have been sitting in attics for 60 years. My job is basically deciding what's worth saving and figuring out how to do it without making things worse. I've gotten pretty good at both. Derek is a corporate attorney. We met at a friend's cookout in Raleigh, got serious fast, got engaged after 2 years. He's one of the best people I know. He also grew up in a household where Sandra was the center of gravity, and that does things to a person. The first time I met Sandra was at Sunday dinner at their house in Pinehurst. I'd come straight from a job site, and I had sawdust on my jacket. She shook my hand and said, "Derek mentioned you work with antiques. How fun!" The way she said fun made it sound like something you'd humor a child for. I didn't think much of it at the time. Some people are like that. I figured she'd warm up. She did not warm up. For the next 2 years, Sandra operated like a slow leak. Nothing dramatic enough to point to, just a steady draining. She'd call Derek on Sunday evenings to talk about family stuff, dinners, holidays, his cousin's graduation party, and somehow I'd find out about these things 2 days later when it was too late to rearrange my schedule. When I mentioned it to Derek, she said she'd assumed he would tell me, and she was sorry for the miscommunication, and she had the most sincere look on her face when she said it. At her book club Christmas party, she introduced me to her friends as Derek's girlfriend who does, furniture refinishing. I have a master's degree in historic preservation, and I've restored pieces that are now in 3 different museums. But sure, furniture refinishing. 6 months before the wedding, she called me and asked if I'd like to have lunch. Just the 2 of us. I thought maybe she was trying. So I went. She ordered a salad, made small talk for about 10 minutes, and then slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $75,000. She said, "I want you to know this comes from a place of genuine care. Derek has a certain path ahead of him, a certain kind of life. I just want to make sure everyone involved is being realistic about what that means." I sat there for a second. Then I put the check back in the envelope and pushed it across the table. I said, "I appreciate the lunch, but I'm going to pass." She didn't react, just folded her napkin and said, "Of course, I understand. But something shifted in her eyes. And after that, things changed. What I haven't mentioned yet is that Sandra had a partner. Diane was her closest friend from college, godmother to Derek's younger brother, practically family. She was also the one Sandra had been texting about a plan that involved more than just ruining my evening. I know about the text because 3 weeks before the wedding, Sandra left her phone on the kitchen counter when she came over to drop off some things. She went out to her car to get a box, and her screen lit up with the notification. I glanced over, not trying to snoop, and saw enough. The plan was 2 parts. Sandra would put something in my drink to make me sick during the reception. While I was down, Diane would circulate through the guest tables, handing out printed photos, pictures of me with another man at what looked like a hotel. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. I put her phone back exactly where it was. When she came back in, I helped her unpack the box, which was full of monogrammed cocktail napkins I hadn't asked for. The next day, I sent the screenshot to a friend of mine who does digital forensics work for a law firm in Atlanta. She got back to me within 48 hours. The photos were composites. The metadata had been edited. The image files had been created on a device connected to Sandra's home network. I printed the report and put it in my car. Then I went back to planning the wedding. The week before the wedding was when she really started pushing. On Tuesday, my florist called to tell me that someone had phoned in saying the wedding had been postponed due to a family emergency and asked to cancel the order. My florist had the sense to call me before doing anything. I told her everything was fine, confirmed all the details, and called the venue to give them a heads up. On Thursday, I found a long pull in the lace of my veil. It wasn't a snag from a hanger or a hook. The tension of it was all wrong. Someone had grabbed it and pulled. Sandra had been in the bridal suite 2 days earlier to drop off a gift. I repaired it myself with a needle and thread. It took me 2 hours. I didn't tell Derek about any of it. I knew if I did, Sandra would find a way to make it about me. She'd say I was stressed and seeing things. She'd been building that narrative for 2 years that I was high-strung, that I had trouble adjusting to her family's way of doing things. If I showed up 3 days before my wedding accusing her of sabotage, I was handing her the exact story she wanted. So I waited. The reception started at 6. The Westbrook Ballroom holds about 250. Derek's family had invited what felt like all of Pinehurst. By 7:30, everyone had eaten. The speeches were wrapping up, and the band was about to start their second set. And then Sandra stood up. She had a champagne flute in her hand, the one I'd switched, and she was tapping it with a knife to get the room's attention. She didn't look nervous. She looked like a woman who had been waiting all evening for this exact moment. She talked about marriage, about legacy and family, and knowing where you come from. It was smooth, practiced, the kind of thing that sounds like a compliment until you actually listen to what's being said. The people who knew her laughed in the right places. The people who didn't looked moved. She said, "A great marriage is built on trust, and knowing that the person next to you is exactly who they say they are." I kept my face neutral. I raised my water glass when she raised hers. She drank. I watched. 1 minute, 2 minutes. She set the glass down and turned to say something to my uncle, who was seated next to her. At the 3-minute mark, she stopped mid-sentence. Her hand went to her throat. Her face went a kind of grey I'd only ever seen on people who were about to pass out. She grabbed the edge of the table. The centerpiece went over white peonies, water, glass, and then Sandra went down with it. The room erupted. Derek said, "Mom, Mom, can you hear me?" While everyone was rushing towards Sandra, I saw Diane stand up from table 9. She had an envelope in her hand, and she was moving toward the middle of the room. I got there first. I didn't make a scene. I just stepped in front of her and said, quietly, "Diane, I have a forensic report on those photos. Sit back down, or I'm going to hand that report to the police officer who's about to walk through that door. Your call." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she sat back down. I went back to helping coordinate the paramedics. When the EMTs were loading Sandra onto the stretcher, her clutch slipped off the chair and hit the floor. The clasp popped open. The vial rolled out empty now, along with her lipstick and a folded piece of paper. I picked up the paper before anyone else got to it. It was typed, 1 page, single-spaced. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a moment to address what just happened. As many of you may know, our bride has struggled quietly for some time with anxiety and certain stress-related episodes. We had all hoped today would be different. Unfortunately, it seems the excitement of the occasion became overwhelming. Derek and I will make sure she receives the care she needs, and we ask for your understanding and discretion as we help our family through this difficult moment." She'd written it before the reception. She was going to take the microphone while I was on the floor and read it to 250 people. I walked over to Derek and handed it to him. I watched him read it. He read it twice. Then he folded it very carefully, the way you fold something you intend to keep. He didn't look at me right away. He just stood there for a moment, holding the paper. Then he walked straight to the police officer who'd arrived with the ambulance and said, "She wasn't having a medical emergency. She ingested something she intended to put in my wife's drink. I have the vial. I have a written statement she prepared in advance, and my wife has a forensic report on related evidence. I want to press charges." His father, Tom, was sitting against the wall with his face in his hands. He looked up and said, "Derek, she's your mother." Derek said, "I know who she is, Dad." That was all. He signed the statement. His hand didn't shake. I noticed that. We spent part of our wedding night in a hospital waiting room. I had my dress bunched up on a plastic chair. Derek had loosened his tie. We'd sent everyone home. The ballroom was probably still being cleaned up. He told me about Kayla somewhere around midnight. Kayla was his girlfriend before me about 5 years back. She was a physical therapist, grew up in Wilmington, not a lot of money, but she was smart, and Derek had been serious about her. Then one day she sent him a text saying she'd realized they wanted different things, and she was ending it. No call, no conversation, just gone. Derek said, "I never understood it. She seemed happy. We seemed good. And then she just disappeared." He looked at the floor for a second and said, "I think I understand now." I didn't say anything. I just put my hand on his arm. Sometimes that's all there is to do. Sandra was charged with aggravated assault and criminal poisoning. She pled not guilty, which would have been more convincing if her attorney could have explained away the typed speech she'd prepared 3 days in advance. She couldn't. Sandra was convicted on both counts and sentenced to 22 months. Diane received a suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. She also resigned from 3 non-profit boards she'd sat on for years, which I suspect hurt her more than the legal outcome. Tom paid for a lawyer for Sandra. Derek found out. They haven't spoken since, as far as I know. I don't ask. It's been about 14 months since the wedding. We live in a 2-bedroom place in East Charlotte. Derek still does corporate law. I have a workshop in the garage where I do most of my restoration work. It's a normal life. Good, mostly. People who find out what happened usually want it to mean something bigger, like we're stronger for it, like it brought us closer, like there's a lesson in there somewhere. Maybe. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it that way. What I think about more is Kayla, whether she's okay, whether she ever told anyone what happened to her or just quietly moved on and tried to forget it. I hope she's okay. Last week, I finished restoring a 1940s dresser that had been in pretty rough shape, veneer peeling, 2 drawers completely stuck. Someone had painted over the whole thing at some point with the wrong kind of paint. It took me a long time. There were moments where I wasn't sure it was worth it. When I was done, I called Derek in to look at it. He stood in the doorway for a second. Derek said, "That looks brand new." "Not brand new, but close," I said. He nodded, went back inside, and that was the end of it. That felt about right.